Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown, and I see Matthew Stockton sitting across from me.
Hello, sir. Hello, everybody out there in podcast land listening to us. I'm picturing people in cars, at work, lying in bed listening to us.
On the train.
On the bus, in the airplane.
Apparently some people fall asleep to our voices, which I don't understand.
Wake up. Wake up. Every 400 words I'm getting, wake up.
Oh, no. So this is an interesting script. I like this topic for a number of reasons, because it covers a lot of ground as far as making one think. But also what makes us think is Matthew actually wrote a script for this particular story.
And then I managed to spill an entire cup of coffee on my laptop. I am an old boy, so didn't save things to the cloud, lost the script, forgot that I did it. So when Mike sent me this, I'm like, I wrote an entire script for this.
Yeah. And you're telling me that you actually really went in depth and had pictures and stuff to share with me.
I got pictures. I bought books and read them. Yeah.
Oh, boy. Sometimes things like this happen.
I even got in touch with the Museum of Vancouver, who has the handcuffs that he was in. So thank you for rewriting it for me.
Oh, you're welcome. I didn't know that you'd ever written it. You told me that you were interested in doing it, but it just never appeared on because I would have saved it.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, well.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense, and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
The night of February 27, 1884 was moonless and cold on Sumas Prairie. Telegraph Road ran north from the American border through flat, dark farmland, cutting between fence lines and the occasional rough-hewn homestead. In the winter of 1884, there were no street lamps, no neighbors within shouting distance, and after sundown, no sound but the wind off the mountains to the east. Just before 9 o'clock that night, the sound of horses broke the silence. A lot of horses. 70 riders or more moving fast from the south, crossing the international boundary between Washington Territory and British Columbia without slowing down. They had left the Nooksack Valley 2 hours earlier in the dark, and they had come prepared. Their faces blackened with charcoal, their coats turned inside out, red paint was drawn in bands across their eyes. A few wore women's skirts over their clothes. They called themselves the Nooksack Vigilance Committee. They were armed with pistols, buffalo guns, and a length of hemp rope. Less than a kilometer north of the border, the mob pulled up in front of a farmhouse, the home of Thomas York, the most prominent settler on Sumas Prairie. More than a dozen men dismounted and let themselves inside. They disarmed York and took charge of their target, a 15-year-old Stolo youth named Louie Sam from Kilgard, a village barely a kilometer up the road. Canadian authorities had arrested him the day before on suspicion of murder. He was being held at the York farmhouse until he could be transported to New Westminster for trial. Those arrangements would never be completed. The men slipped Louie Sam's shoes onto his feet, looped a large rope around his arm, and hauled him outside into the cold. Two men lifted the slender boy onto a small horse. William Moultrie, one of the most powerful businessmen in the Nooksack Valley, took the reins. The mob rode south with Louie Sam in hand. He would not come home alive. What those men did to Louie Sam that night had a name well known to Americans by 1884. In Canada, however, it was rarer, but not unheard of. The word was lynching. You're listening to Dark Poutine episode 432, Not Justice, Lynching Louie Sam. Lynching. The word has an origin story, though historians disagree on the details. The most widely accepted account traces to Charles Lynch, a Virginia planter and justice of the peace who, during the Revolutionary War, ran an unauthorized court to punish British loyalists. Lynch never actually hanged anyone, as far as the record shows. But his name stuck to the broader practice of communities punishing people outside the law. By the early 19th century, lynch law had entered the American vocabulary. By mid-century, it described something far darker than a kangaroo court. It was never purely a Southern phenomenon. Lynching spread wherever settlers outpaced the legal institutions meant to govern them, into mining camps, logging towns, cattle valleys, and frontier settlements from Georgia to Oregon. The logic was consistent. The courts were too slow, too far away, or too lenient, and the community knew better. That reasoning crossed every border and worked in every climate. It did not belong to one region or one flag. The Tuskegee University archives hold the most complete record of American lynchings. Between 1882 and 1968, they documented 4,743 cases. Of those victims, 3,446 were black. The practice peaked in 1892 when 230 people were killed in a single year. 7 American presidents petitioned Congress to outlaw it between 1890 and 1952. 3 anti-lynching bills passed the House of Representatives. The Senate killed all 3, each time by filibuster. Canada's story is different, but not as different as Canadians prefer to believe. In 1873, a man was hanged by his companions in Abinger Township, Ontario. The Toronto Globe reported that he had been, quote, tried by his companions the next morning and suffered death under lynch law by hanging, end quote. That same month, the Globe reported that, quote, a number of shantymen lynched, end quote, a suspected murderer in Kennebec. In February 1880, 5 members of the Donnelly family, Irish immigrants living in Lucan, just north of London, Ontario, were beaten to death in the night by what the Globe called a, quote, vigilance committee, end quote. We covered that in episode 208. The paper described it plainly as murder by self-constituted judges. Canada's founding creed, peace, order, and good government, shaped how the country understood itself in relation to mob violence. The assumption, then as now, was that such things belonged to the American story, that when they appeared here, they had blown in from the South. But that's not exactly how it went. However, what happened to Louie Sam fit that assumption neatly. An American mob, an American victim, American men on horseback crossing the line, it was easy to file it away as something foreign, an import, an aberration, a neighbor's crime that had taken place on Canadian soil. That framing is convenient, but also wrong. What happened on the Sumas Prairie in February 1884 was the only fully documented racial lynching in Canadian history. It was carried out by American men, yes, but it was made possible by Canadian authorities who arrested the boy, held him without proper procedure, and stepped aside when the riders came. The border the mob crossed that night was not a barrier, it was just a formality. There were no customs agents at the time to ask, "What's your business here?" To understand how a 15-year-old boy ended up handcuffed in that farmhouse, we need to understand who he was and the world he was born into. Sam Louie's people, the Stolo, called themselves People of the River. Stolo was the Hochemalim word for the Fraser, the great river that ran from the interior of British Columbia down through the coast mountains and out to the Salish Sea. Their territory followed it, from the river's mouth near present-day Vancouver, east through the Fraser Valley, and up into the canyon, a stretch of more than 150 kilometers. Oral history and archaeological evidence placed their presence in that valley at 10,000 years or more. Their traditional territory had a name, Soltemex, translated, our land. It was a society built on the river and everything the river gave, salmon, sturgeon, other fish, waterfowl, game, and the plants that grew along the banks across the valley floor. The longhouse, the winter ceremony, and the extended family were its foundations. The Stolo were not a single band, but a network of related peoples, each with their own territory, their own village, their own place within the larger world. Sam's people, the Semá, were one of those peoples. Their territory centered on Sumas Prairie and the lake that once covered it, a vast, shallow body of water sitting between Sumas and Vedder Mountains. For thousands of years, Sumas Lake was the center of Semá life. It gave them abundant fish and waterfowl, a transportation corridor, and a gathering place for ceremonies that drew Coast Salish people from communities across the region. Their main village, Quequehewik, sat at what is now the community of Kilgard, where Louie Sam grew up, just north of the American border. The first catastrophe arrived before any European set foot in the Fraser Valley, but they were involved, albeit tangentially. Smallpox had been on the continent since the 1500s, carried by Spanish explorers along the Pacific coast and spreading inland along indigenous trade routes faster than any European traveler could follow. By 1782, it had reached the Fraser Valley, decades before Simon Fraser explored the river in 1808. Some Stolo communities lost an estimated 60 to 90% of their people in those first months. Whole villages emptied. The survivors regrouped with kin in fewer, larger settlements, carrying their grief and their knowledge forward into a world that had been catastrophically reduced. The second catastrophe wore boots and carried a gold pan. In 1858, between 25 and 40,000 prospectors, most of them American, poured into the Fraser Valley. The Stolo called them Huilitum, the hungry ones. It wasn't a compliment. They arrived unable to feed themselves from the land, dependent on indigenous knowledge and labor just to survive, and then stayed to take everything the land contained. By the 1870s, Louie Sam's people had been pushed onto a reserve at Kilgard, which was just a fraction of their traditional territory. They still fished the Fraser. They still hired themselves out to white farmers on the prairie. They still crossed the border freely to visit kin among the Nooksack people in Washington Territory. The 49th parallel was a settler invention. Semá families had lived on both sides of it since long before anyone drew that line. Around 1869 or 1870, Louie Sam was born into this world. His father was a man the white community called Missachi Sam. Missachi was a word of Chinook jargon, which was the trade language of the Pacific Northwest, and the word meant bad or wicked. It was a label that stuck. Was it just? Does it matter? Anyway, it was a name that would soon be passed to his son.
One of the most dangerous things a society can do is decide somebody's story before they write it.
Right. Yeah.
Because after that, every new piece of information gets sorted within a box that's already been built.
Sometimes a name is given to somebody that, just supports a community narrative.
And the facts stop leading and the narrative starts leading. Grade 6, I think it was. All summer, I was fearing that I had to be in Miss Phillips' class.
Miss Phillips? What was with Miss Phillips?
Miss Phillips, in a tree. She's a penguin, can't you see?
Oh, no.
So, yeah, we were mean, but she was just kind of the scary teacher. She took no crap, right? So it's the first day and she's reading alphabetical order and she said, just say present if you're here. And she didn't look up from the paper once and she goes, Stockton, Matthew. And I say, present. And she looks up and she goes, which one? I raise my hand and she goes, you wouldn't happen to be Alan's son, would you? And I said, yes, I am. And she says, well, I certainly hope you're a better student than he was.
Oh, no.
And I was like, I'm effed. I'm effed this year. I spent some time in the hallway outside of Miss Phillips' class.
I had a similar experience with a Mrs. Romke from my hometown who taught my mother and my uncle.
You realize later that, like as an adult, my mom knew her. Miss Phillips is a fine person. She just did put up with crap in class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her story preceded her. That said, Mrs. Romke, my teacher, could be pretty mean. That was 4th grade, yeah. In the summer of 1883, the Northern Pacific Railway completed its transcontinental line linking Seattle to the rail network that ran across the Midwest to the Atlantic seaboard. The effect on Whatcom County in what was then Washington Territory was immediate. Money arrived. People followed. The population of Washington Territory would grow 5-fold before the decade was out, and the Nooksack Valley, flat, fertile, and sitting just south of the Canadian border, caught its share of the boom. Among the new arrivals that year were the Hopkins brothers. Madison, Albert, and Edmund had come north from the White River Valley, southeast of Seattle, part of a small exodus that settled along the Sumas River, 2 miles south of the border. They were Civil War veterans' kin, hard men from hard country, and they arrived with plans. Those plans ended on Thanksgiving morning, November 29, 1883, when Madison Hopkins was shot dead by a man named J.P. Stone over an unpaid mortgage. Stone charged out of his house with a Winchester rifle and fired. First into Madison's abdomen as he stood, then into his chest and leg as he lay helpless on the ground. Stone fled into the bush and was never found. Authorities launched a manhunt, offered a $1,000 reward, brought in a private detective agency, but nothing ever came of it. Albert and Edmund Hopkins buried their brother and went on living in the Nooksack Valley, carrying their grief with nowhere to put it. Across the border on Sumas Prairie, Louie Sam's father was dying in prison. Squoselany Sam, the man white settlers called Missachi Sam, had been convicted of cattle theft in 1882 under circumstances that bore little resemblance to justice. The magistrate who presided over his hearing was the plaintiff's son-in-law. The charge itself was dubious. The steer in question had wandered onto Semá land and had been killed after destroying crops. Squoselany Sam was sentenced to 5 years in the BC pen, 2 to 3 years more than any comparable sentence handed to a white defendant for the same offense. He was tubercular by the time he arrived. The prison was overcrowded, the conditions brutal. He would be dead within 2 years of his conviction. The world Louie Sam grew up in was shaped by all of this. On both sides of the border, the legal system operated differently depending on whose name appeared on the charge sheet, especially if they were not white. White newspapers described Indigenous people in language that moved freely between contempt and alarm stoked by fear. Menacing when present, inconvenient when they demanded justice. Settlers who killed Indigenous people faced juries made up of their neighbors. Indigenous people who killed white settlers faced juries of white settlers. It was into this valley in this climate on a gray Sunday afternoon in February 1884 that someone put a bullet through James Bell's head, set his cabin on fire, and left him to burn. James Bell had not had an easy few years, and obviously his end wasn't easy either. Bell was Scottish-born, approaching 60, and living in a rough-hewn cabin along Telegraph Road, a mile northeast of Nooksack Crossing. He had come to the Nooksack Valley in the late 1870s with his wife Annette and their young son, staked a claim on a quarter section of land, and opened a small store in the front half of the cabin. The plan had been a modest one. It didn't work out. Bell could not compete with the well-stocked stores at the crossing run by William Moultrie and David Harkness, where most white customers shopped. The customers Bell drew were largely indigenous, Semá and Nooksack people who had little cash to spend. One Nooksack elder later recalled that Bell's store sold cheap jewelry, something like dime store goods. Pretty near all the indigenous people bought earrings, pins, and beads. With little money coming in, Bell fell behind on the improvements required to secure full ownership of his land. Then his marriage collapsed. Annette left him without obtaining a divorce and took up with another store proprietor, David Harkness, one of the valley's most prominent men. On June 7, 1883, she married Harkness in Victoria. The ceremony was quiet. No Nooksack friends attended. The clergyman officiating had no way of knowing that Annette Bell was still legally another man's wife. Bell's 10-year-old son, James Jr., went to live in the Harkness household. Bell was left alone in the cabin with his failing store and a legal situation he lacked the money and nerve to take care of. By February 1884, James Bell was a man the valley had largely chosen to forget. Sunday morning, February 24th. Peter Gillies and his family set out from their home on Telegraph Road for the 4-mile walk to Nooksack Crossing, where they attended the local Presbyterian church. Passing Bell's cabin along the way, Gillies noted a puff of white smoke drifting from the chimney. Bell was English, and Gillies suspected he might not be the church-going type. The family walked on. An hour later, the service ended. The Gillies family started home. A few minutes into the walk, they saw William Osterman, the telegraph operator at Nooksack Crossing, riding hard toward them from Bell's direction. The iron shoes on Osterman's horse sent sparks flying off the gravel road as he passed without a word. The family walked on. They rounded a corner and stopped. Bell's cabin was on fire. Heavy smoke poured from the front half of the building as flames consumed the storeroom. The Gillies boys ran to the back of the cabin and forced the kitchen door. Inside on the floor lay James Bell. He was face up, arms thrown overhead, feet pointed toward the back door. There was a gaping wound at the back of his skull and a smaller hole below his right eye. He had not died in any fire. Neighbors gathered quickly. A search party fanned out from the clearing and picked up faint tracks leading west into swampy ground. Following a trail, they found a handkerchief and a pair of suspenders snagged on a tree branch. The party brought the items back to Bell's, and it was there that someone in the crowd said that they had seen Louie Sam earlier that day in the area, carrying an old Hudson's Bay Company musket. That was all it took. Word moved through the white community of the Nooksack Valley with speed. A 15-year-old Semá boy had killed and robbed James Bell. George Gillies later recalled that from the moment Louie Sam's name was spoken, talk of summary violence spread through the crowd and didn't stop.
Yeah, I've always thought of human beings as sort of pattern recognition machines. The upside is that we can make sense of a complicated world, but the downside is we can make sense of a complicated world just a little bit too quickly.
Yeah.
You know, and once people think they found a pattern, they stop looking for alternatives. And that's often where mistakes become inevitabilities in cases.
Remember the Boston City Marathon bombing?
Yeah.
There was a lot of video released by police, pictures. Have you seen these guys? And the folks on Reddit analyzed these pictures. Good-hearted folks. They are just looking to solve a mystery kind of thing. Essentially, they ended up accusing the wrong guy, and this went viral. It's a very similar situation to that. I mean, we just see it amplified, and it happens much more quickly today.
And it also becomes amplified and happens much more quickly, like in the old days when race or religion is involved.
That's right, yeah. So the following morning, Coroner Dr. Sherebiah Manley arrived from Bellingham Bay to convene the inquest. He impaneled 6 jurors, all neighbors of Bell. After a day of testimony, the jury returned its verdict. Foreman Peter Gillies Sr. read it aloud and named Louie Sam as the killer. Louie Sam was 15 years old and on the other side of an international border here in Canada. He had not yet been questioned, charged, or given any opportunity to speak. In Nooksack Valley at the time, none of that seemed to matter. The morning after the inquest, Sheriff Stuart Leckie put together a posse and crossed the border into British Columbia. His deputies were Robert Breckenridge, Bell's nearest neighbor along Telegraph Road, along with Bob Johnson, James Perry, and a 36-year-old American named Jim Steele, who lived just over a mile south of the line and worked regularly for Thomas York. The four men rode north to York's farmhouse on Sumas Prairie, where they met William Campbell, the local justice of the peace. Campbell was not a neutral party. He was Thomas York's son-in-law, married to York's daughter Phoebe, and between them the two men effectively ran Sumas Prairie. York was its wealthiest and most powerful settler, a man locals called the Squire of the Prairie. Campbell was his instrument in the courts. Together they had used that arrangement before to their advantage and to the disadvantage of their indigenous neighbors. That Tuesday evening, Campbell and Leckie's posse rode out into the Kilgard Reserve and they found Louie Sam and arrested him. Campbell appears to have told the boy as he handcuffed him that he was accused of killing a man, just as his father had been accused before him. Sam was taken back to York's farmhouse and locked in the storage room that served as a makeshift jail. At that point, procedure was clear. A murder suspect in a cross-border case, an Indigenous boy from British Columbia accused of killing an American citizen, required the immediate involvement of a senior officer. Campbell should have telegraphed the acting superintendent, William Moresby, in New Westminster that night. Moresby could have been on the Sumas Prairie by noon the following day. He would have made it a priority. This was the most serious case ever to land on the prairie, an international murder with a white American victim and an Indigenous suspect in custody. Campbell never sent the telegram.
You know what I find interesting in this story is that everybody focuses on the mob. Like this is the fame of the story, if you will.
Yeah.
But systems are often revealed by what they don't do. Well, the telegram isn't sent.
Right. Yeah.
Protection isn't strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
The obvious precautions aren't taken.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worth asking whether the story is about a mob or whether it's about a system that's just quietly deciding not to interfere. I would not want to live in these times, Mike.
No, it's very easy to be accused of something and then strung up, especially if you're somebody who's different. We'll be back after a quick break. And we are back at the halfway point. Matthew, thoughts so far?
I think what keeps jumping out at me is how much energy is being spent finding a culprit and how little energy is being spent protecting the process. Because those aren't the same thing. You know, a healthy society, and I'm not saying that back then it wasn't a very healthy society, actually, right? A healthy society should care less about getting an answer quickly and more about getting the answer right.
Because that's what justice is.
Exactly.
Justice is actually getting it correct.
Justice is taking your time, making sure you're right, make sure it's correct, find the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people don't usually work that way. They want closure and they want certainty and they want to know that the anxiety is going to end. And the problem is that certainty is a feeling, but truth is a process. And when society starts valuing the feeling more than the process, people like Louie get hurt.
This is why we rely on factual evidence more heavily than circumstantial evidence.
Yeah.
I don't like the guy, but I saw him around the crime scene, so it must have been him. It had to have been.
Yeah, or we all know who did it.
Right.
We all know the parents are guilty, right?
We've seen it so many times. It's continually happening this way.
Yeah.
I've seen it in so many different cases.
Because as Mike would say, people are dum-dums.
Well, I'm a dum-dum too, so, I mean, you know, I'm not saying people other than me are dum-dums. I'm including myself in the people. On Wednesday morning, Louie Sam was brought out of the storage room and interrogated by his captors. They wanted a confession. He said nothing. After the questioning ended, Campbell completed his paperwork, signed the arrest warrant, deputized Thomas York and Jim Steele as special constables, and made them legally responsible for the prisoner. Steele, the American, was left in charge of guarding Sam that night. After lunch, Robert Breckenridge rode south with the news. James Bell's funeral was already underway on a neighbor's property when Breckenridge arrived. For a man most of the valley had quietly forgotten while he lived, the service drew a large crowd, most of the white residents from miles around. After the burial, the valley's most prominent men gathered around Breckenridge. The Harkness brothers, Albert and Edmund Hopkins, who we mentioned earlier, William Moultrie, and William Osterman. They spoke in low voices, gestured, and nodded. The rest of the mourners looked on. A plan was made, riding orders were given, and the men dispersed to prepare. Sheriff Leckie lingered on Sumas Prairie until later that evening, then finally headed home south down Telegraph Road. He rode past York's farmhouse without stopping, past the storage room where Louie Sam sat handcuffed in the dark, and kept going. Inside the house, Jim Steele settled in for the night with a rifle across his lap. The riders would come at 9 o'clock. They left the Nooksack Valley after dark, 70 men or more on horseback, moving north up Telegraph Road toward the Canadian border. Albert and Edmund Hopkins, thirsty for vengeance of any kind, even if not directly related to their brother's death, rode at the head of the disguised mob. 2 miles south of the border, the mob encountered a lone rider heading the other way. It was Sheriff Stuart Leckie making his way home from Sumas Prairie. Leckie knew exactly what 70 armed and disguised men riding north in the dark were planning to do. He made no move to stop them. One witness later recalled his words to the riders as they passed, quote, "How do you do, boys? You'll find 'em up there, all right." End quote. Then the sheriff rode on, and the mob rode on, and the border came and went without ceremony.
That line bothers me because it reveals something about groups. People agree something is acceptable. Morality gets replaced by consensus.
Yep.
And consensus is a terrible substitute for morality. And, just open a newspaper, any newspaper today. Not that anyone actually reads physical newspapers anymore. Go to a news site.
Right.
And, history proves over and over and over again that keeps happening.
This is the struggle I have with jury trials as well. Because, juries are full of people, dum-dums like me, who are swayed sometimes by emotion, and then emotion can outweigh fact.
Yeah, and it can. And also, just because 90% of people agree about something doesn't mean it's right.
It becomes the truth of a society.
90% of 1930s Germany decided to round up Jews. Oh, well, democracy.
Yeah. Just before 9 o'clock in the evening on February 27th, 1884, the riders pulled up in front of Thomas York's farmhouse. More than a dozen men dismounted and let themselves inside. They filled the front room. One voice called out that they were there to take the prisoner. Thomas York came down the stairs in his bedclothes, a shotgun in one hand and a rifle in the other. The men pointed pistols at him and told him to stay back. York's 2 hired hands, young Welshmen named Richard Williams and Owen Hughes, newly arrived in Canada, rushed into the room and were shoved against the wall, guns in their faces. Jim Steele, the special constable assigned to guard Louie Sam, sat in the corner of the room with his rifle cradled across his lap. He didn't move. Sam was already out of the locked storage room and standing in the middle of the front room, handcuffed and surrounded on all sides. Later, when the coroner's inquest asked how the mob had gotten through a bolted front door, Hughes testified that before he went to bed, all the doors had been fastened. He'd heard someone moving around in the front room before the mob arrived. The doors, he concluded, must have been opened from the inside. Steele, perhaps? They ushered Louie Sam outside and put him on a horse. The mob thundered back down Telegraph Road with Louie Sam gripping the pommel of his saddle to keep from falling. They stopped 169 paces north of the international boundary line. There, teenagers, Peter Harkness and William Gillies, had been left to wait. The riders drew their horses into a circle around their prisoner. Several men struck Louie Sam with fists and gun stocks, demanding a confession. He refused to give one. Instead, according to the account recorded by historian Keith Carlson from a source close to the events, Louie Sam saw through the disguise of the man holding his horse and recognized him. Louie's last alleged words were a threat to William Moultrie, telling Moultrie he'd fix Moultrie for good if he got out of this. Louie Sam was not getting out of this. His ankles had been tied together, a rope had been fashioned into a noose and thrown over an overhanging tree limb and secured. The noose was around Sam Louie's neck. Moultrie slapped Sam's horse on the behind, and when it bolted from under Sam Louie, the rope pulled taut. Sure Louie Sam was dead, the mob fled immediately, slowing only after they crossed the border back into Washington territory. Thursday morning, Thomas York sent word to Thisamut, the 50-year-old chief of the Sumas Reserve, known to white residents as Chief Charlie. He collected another Semath elder, Jim York, and the two men rode to find William Campbell. The magistrate who had held the boy in his custody, who'd chosen the guard, sent no telegram, and made no real move to protect his prisoner, greeted them with feigned surprise, saying, quote, "I wonder what they took him away for," end quote. The three men rode south. Jim Steele joined them as they passed York's farmhouse. They found Louie Sam's body hanging from a tree along Telegraph Road. Campbell cut the rope and removed the handcuffs from the boy's stiffened wrists. He kept them. Thisamut lifted Sam and draped him across his horse. He delivered the body to Sam's sister at Kilgard. The coroner's inquest into Sam Louie's death opened on Saturday, March 1st at Thomas York's farmhouse, the same building from which the boy had been taken 4 nights earlier. Provincial Police Superintendent Charles Todd traveled from Victoria to preside. 9 local men were selected as jurors. The eyewitnesses took the stand one by one. Thomas York testified that 70 men had invaded his home, that he had been disarmed, and that he had not recognized a single one of them, not by face, not by voice. His wife Anne said the same. The 2 Welsh hired hands described the armed men who had filled the front room and shoved guns in their faces. Jim Steele, the special constable who had sat in the corner with his rifle and done nothing, did not testify. The excuse was that he was an American citizen and could not be compelled to appear. He had been willing enough to swear an oath to Queen Victoria when Campbell deputized him. He knew what had happened in that room. He was never asked under oath about it. The jury concluded that Louie Sam had been lynched by persons supposed to be American, and they declined to name anyone. The province sent undercover detectives south across the border. The first, a man named Clark, moved through the Nooksack Valley posing as an itinerant laborer. Settlers talked, some boasted. Robert Breckenridge, the man who had lodged the murder charge against Sam and helped organize the mob at Bell's funeral, spoke to Clark on Telegraph Road. When asked whether Sam had confessed before he was hanged, Breckenridge replied that they had gotten nothing out of him. Then he said, quote, "I would kill a Chinaman as quick as I would an Indian, and I would kill an Indian as quick as I would a dog." End quote. Jeez. James Harkness Sr. was equally untroubled. Quote, "I did not hinder my boys from going to hang the Indian," he said, "because I knew it was right enough." End quote. Clark's cover was eventually blown. Locals warned he would catch an incurable throat disease if he stayed. He left. The second detective returned with notebooks full of names and statements. The Canadian government did nothing with any of it. Victoria and Ottawa both contacted Washington, D.C. requesting the identification and extradition of the mob's leaders. The governor of Washington Territory directed his prosecutor to act immediately and vigorously. The prosecutor explained it was impossible to investigate disguised men when the entire community was committed to protecting their secret. The matter was dropped. The Stolo were not waiting on Ottawa. Within days of the lynching, approximately 200 delegates from more than 20 communities along the lower Fraser River converged on the Squiala Reserve in Chilliwack. The gathering lasted more than a week. Young delegates pushed hard for armed retaliation. Indian agent Patrick McTiernan, summoned to the smokehouse, recorded the demand plainly: cross the border and, quote, hang and kill 65 Americans, end quote. Guns and ammunition were stockpiled. Scouts went into the field. The elders counseled patience. McTiernan promised federal action. On March 27th, 127 delegates signed a statement speaking of the, quote, sickness of our hearts, end quote, at the actions of a mob that had, quote, took an innocent Indian boy 15 years of age and without 5 minutes' warning lynched him to the next tree they met, end quote. They chose to leave the matter, quote, at present in the hands of the Dominion government, end quote.
We touched on this earlier. I think modern culture, this just made me think of like today as well. Like modern culture dramatically underrates restraint. If what we're talking about here, Mike, is lynching and mob justice back then, and I think it happens less physically, but more digitally. We're obsessed with action, like take action, do something, respond, fight back. And if you study history, some of the most consequential decisions are the moments where people had every reason to escalate and chose not to. And that's a different kind of strength. And, you know, if there was restraint here, an innocent 15-year-old boy would have been okay.
Absolutely.
I felt so much for this kid when I did the research on this. He's a kid, right? Yeah.
Yep, he was a kid. And who knows, maybe, you know, the tracks were his. Maybe they did find his suspenders. Maybe he'd seen the person who killed James Bell. Maybe he had seen the murder. Maybe he'd witnessed it and ran away afterward. We'll never know. The Dominion government did nothing with the trust that they'd been given in the matter. Ottawa made noises, sent letters, and waited for the issue to go away. And eventually it did. The case against Sam Louie rested entirely on circumstance. Witnesses placed him in the area that day, but Stolo investigators established that Osterman had invited Sam there himself, promising to work on a telegraph line, then sent him away before the murder. No money was ever found on Sam despite robbery being the stated motive. Physical evidence was never conclusively tied to Bell's store. The fatal bullet was never recovered. And the positioning of Bell's body was not that of somebody who was standing at a counter facing a customer when he was shot, but he was found having been shot in the face by somebody who entered through the back door. There was a strong suspect, though, who actually had a motive: William Osterman. Osterman was the last confirmed person to see Bell alive. His horse, the only shod horse in the neighborhood, left iron prints outside the cabin. Witnesses placed him galloping away from Bell's direction before the fire was even discovered. In his own inquest testimony, he had placed Louie Sam inside Bell's cabin minutes before the murder and placed himself there at the same moment. When Bell's estate was settled, the Harkness family administered it. Osterman was appointed to appraise it. The fees they collected consumed nearly half its value. No one else was ever arrested for the murder of James Bell. No one was ever charged with the murder of Louie Sam. The men who rode north that night were known to their neighbors, known to the detectives, known to the diplomats who exchanged cables between Victoria, Ottawa, and Washington, D.C. They went home, rebuilt their fences, expanded their businesses, and lived out their lives without consequence. William Moultrie became a Washington state senator. Albert Hopkins married and settled down, and William Osterman kept his telegraph office. Thomas York didn't stay. The anger of the Stolo frightened him so badly that he hastily leased out his farm and fled to Seattle with his wife, placing an international border between himself and the people accusing him of complicity. He never returned to Sumas Prairie. Squosalani Sam, Louie's father, the man the valley had spent years calling Mesachi, the man whose reputation had followed his son to the tree, died in the BC pen on February 25, 1885, 2 days before the anniversary of Louie Sam's death. He never knew what happened to his son. The handcuffs William Campbell removed from Louie Sam's wrists that Thursday morning, the ones he kept as a keepsake, hung on the wall of his farmhouse for decades, are now held in the basement of the Vancouver Museum. They are the only physical object confirmed to have touched Louie Sam. John Vaillant, who who wrote about the case for the Walrus in 2008, had the opportunity to put them on. He described them as rusty but still functional. In 2006, the Washington State Senate and House of Representatives passed a resolution acknowledging that both the territorial government of Washington and the government of British Columbia had failed to take adequate action to identify Bell's true killer and bring the leaders of the lynch mob to justice. It expressed the state's deepest sympathies to Louie Sam's descendants. It assigned no financial responsibility and named no names. No equivalent acknowledgement has ever come from the Canadian federal government, the province of British Columbia, or any successor to the Whatcom County authorities whose sheriff pointed the mob up the road and rode away. The tree where Louie Sam was hanged stood alongside what is now Whatcom Road, 169 paces north of the international boundary line. It's gone now. A grain silo stands near the spot. Louie Sam was 15 years old. He was Semá, from the village of Kilgard, on land his people had lived for 10,000 years. He was in lawful Canadian custody awaiting trial that evidence suggested he would have survived. He has been waiting for justice for 140 years, and it's unlikely that it will ever manifest. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 432, Not Justice, Lynching Louie Sam.
That's right, it's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Alrighty, we don't have any voicemails this week, but you know the number. We say it every time, and we'll say it again right here. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. And it's time now for Donut Money donors and new patrons. We don't have any patrons from Patreon, but we do have a couple, actually, yes, two, from Buy Me a Coffee. First up, we have Stacy and Nick, and they say, sending our love and support for all the hard work you do as always, but also in honor of Steve. My favorite quote to share when somebody loses a pet is, don't cry because it's over, but smile because it happened. Stacy and Nick.
Thank you, Stacy and Nick.
I wonder where Stacy and Nick are from, Matthew.
The Danakil Depression in Ethiopia.
Oh, interesting. And they clearly run a... Go ahead.
Sorry? You go ahead.
Just finish what you're going to say.
So it's one of the hottest, driest, and lowest places on Earth.
Oh,
and it has this surreal mix of like neon green sulfur springs and bubbling acidic pools and salt flats. And it kind of looks like another planet. And they're scientists there. Oh,
okay. That's what I was going to suggest, that they do something together. So Stacy and Nick are scientists in Ethiopia. Yeah. What's the name of the place?
The Danakil Depression. So what they're doing is, because it's such, if you imagine bubbling acidic pools, salt flats, etc., they are trying to figure out what life might exist on other planets that have that same sort of landscape.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So like Venus kind of thing.
Yeah, or further out there. It's like, okay, so if there's only neon green sulfur springs, what's living and what could be on other planets with that environment?
That is fascinating.
Yeah, they have a pretty cool job. They met in university, and they've dedicated their life to this, living in Danakil Depression. Well, but they don't get depressed about it. They love their job.
I was going to say, I spent my life living in Michael Brown Depression. So, yeah. Anyway. Tee-hee.
You hoist yourself on your own petard.
Yes, I do. Next, we have Doug Wands. And Doug says, hey, hi, Mike and Matthew. Thinking I may be one of the first monthly contributors inspired by Matthew's promo today.
Thank you, my friend.
He says he's not from Albuquerque, New York, or Arizona. It's actually New Mexico where Albuquerque is, but much closer. He's from Nanaimo. He's played guitar in a band a lifetime ago. Looking forward to the next career guess. Take a poop in your pork pie hat. You guys are the real deal. Sending you the best, Doug.
So Doug has moved to Spotted Lake, BC. It's near Soyuz.
Okay.
And it has, I'm not sure if you know the lakes there. There's these vibrant spots of concentrated minerals, like magnesium sulfate, and it creates this like polka dot visual during the summer months.
So much like the Danakil Depression.
Yeah, no, very different actually. It's a lake. It's not sulfur, and it's swimmable. But he paints there, so he kind of got, you know, the Japanese artist
Yoko Kazuma.
Yeah, so I can never pronounce that name. You know how she does dots and stuff like that? Well, his work is sort of like that, but sort of more natural paintings because of these lakes.
Well, there you go.
You know what? I have a Japanese friend and her 90-year-old mother coming up for tea and biscuits this afternoon, so I'll ask them.
Yeah, they'll know. Yeah. They'll definitely know. Or they'll say, I don't like that artist.
Or they'll say, I don't know that artist.
It could be. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.